Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Happily Ever After podcast, brought to you by the Nikah Co. And this is, of course, a podcast dedicated to everything related to Islamic guidance on marriage and relationships. And today with us, we have another international guest that's joining us all the way from Canada this time. I believe our first Canadian guest, mashallah. And she is an expert, a relationship coach, a professional relationship coach, and a counselor. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Sister Razia Hamidi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam. Jazakallah khair for having me. I always like to fix that correction of expert. I'm a student of this knowledge, and I think that's always really important. We throw that term around a lot.
No, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. But honestly, it's a huge pleasure to have you on. We were just talking beforehand, just saying huge fan of your work. And amazing to have you on to discuss, hopefully, like you said, anything related to marriage, your game, and you're ready to discuss. So there's a lot of different kind of key areas that we are hoping to discuss today. In fact, really the way I'm looking at it today is everything like approaching marriage as opposed to marriage itself. Maybe towards the end we'll come to the relationship itself. I wanted to actually just start with a question that I'm asked a lot on like Instagram and on social media, which is way before you've even found like the person you want to marry, is how do you even know? Like people ask me, how do I know I'm even ready to get married? Like, I'm at a certain age. Does that mean I'm ready now to get married, or are there other factors? So it's a really interesting one, because I know like there's no really kind of like one size fits all answer for this, where everybody is just like, okay, you hit a certain age and you're ready to get married. That's all. So I'm just curious as to hear your thoughts on this. Like, what would you advise someone who's asking you this question? So let's start with that.
Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad abdika wa nabiyyika rasulika nabiyil ummi wa alihi sahbihi sallam. So I love this question. And alhamdulillah, we always knock on our community for things, and I really think it's important to highlight the positives as well. And something that I've been seeing lately, and alhamdulillah makes me so happy, is brothers, brothers who are at the stage of starting a relationship, or even before, reaching out and booking sessions because they want to get clear on what they should be looking for, on what work they need to do internally before they even start that process. So I think this is such an important question, because you honestly, before entering any relationship, and specifically marriage, there's so much deep work that's required for you to have a healthy relationship, and the self-awareness that's required. So many people enter relationships very blindly. So this question of when am I ready? I think alhamdulillah, that question indicates your level of maturity, that you're even approaching it with that mindset, because many times we've entered a relationship and we're talking to someone without even having all of our I'm trying to think of like what the UK term would be, but basically our hens in line. And then we're like, oh, should I be doing this? And it's like, why was that conversation even initiated? So alhamdulillah, that question indicates a sign of maturity. And there's so many ways to go about it. I think the first and most easiest way is talk to the people around you, right? Talk to your parents, talk to close friends, people that you respect and know you well, and ask them, do you think I have the level of maturity? Do you think I'm someone that's ready for a relationship, for marriage, and to start that process? And I think that's a really great way to, if the people that know you closest can't vouch for you, then that's an indication of, maybe there's some areas you need to work on and address before that even happens, inshallah. And if you're afraid of asking those closest to you, that's also an indication that you're not ready to face the truth or face the music, right? So I think off the bat, simplest practical tip I'd give you is ask those that you respect, your parents, your siblings, people that are older than you, and get an indication. Definitely book like a premarital session as well. And again, I would say the next step to this, let's say you've had that conversation, inshallah, and you get the green light and people think that yes, you're really mature, and alhamdulillah, I think you've got things aligned and ready to start that process. I think another great step is then to start doing some of the deep work, because we go into this process of seeking a spouse often just looking for, okay, well, this is what I like. This is what I want in a spouse. But we never really sit and assess, what do I need? And that's the first step that I like to do with my clients, is let's sit down and actually address what your needs are, who you are, and build that map of yourself. Then you go looking for things, because, let's be real, a lot of us are influenced by society of what we think the ideal spouse is, or what's attractive. Oh, I want someone who's like super knowledgeable and is, maybe a speaker and does this, X, Y, Z, Z. And reality might be that's not really what our values are aligned with. Maybe there's certain qualities and things that we really need in our life to, inshallah, obtain the ultimate purpose of marriage, that won't feed or won't complement what our personality or what our capacity is. And so first, it's got to be, what do I need? How do I approach that? And then, inshallah, you can start looking and really deconstruct, why do I want this quality in the person? Am I just being influenced by what's around me, or is this truly, about who I am? So I think, and alhamdulillah, like, people who go down that path, it saves you so much conflict and work later on, before you enter that relationship with someone else.
Yeah, really good points you've mentioned. I think the very first thing, which is just simply reaching out and asking someone, I think that is a huge step to take for someone to be confident enough to ask that. But like you said, if you're not even ready to maybe even hear the truth and face the truth, then perhaps you're not quite there yourself. So I think that is super important. We're actually also going to come to why do we get married and what we look for in a relationship and in a marriage. Just on the point really quickly on when we're ready to get married. Today, in the day and age that we're in, with social media and also just societal and family pressures, there is this notion of, you are a certain age now, or you have a job now, you've now graduated. That means automatically you've qualified to now get married. And some people, they do feel really pressured almost into getting married. What would you advise someone who's kind of in this particular situation, that's they don't really feel ready themselves, or they don't know if they're ready themselves, but people are kind of pushing them towards it? I know it's a difficult one, but what would you advise in this case?
So I always try to steer away from like general scenarios.
Yeah.
So I guess someone who's listening to this and feels like that's the boat they're in, where they alhamdulillah check off all those traditional boxes that we think marriage requires, and they're feeling pressure but they're not ready to get married, I'd explore that, right? So why is it that you don't feel ready? What's something that's pulling at you? Is there something like previous trauma or like a previous negative experience that's really left you in a bad state? I know some of the men and women I work with, going through that process of getting to know people, and sometimes it doesn't work out. It's very emotionally draining, right? And we can sit with that experience and acknowledge it. And sometimes they're just kind of told, okay, move on from it, like get to know someone else. And I think you have to give yourself time to really heal from that. And so a lot of people start just closing off and being like, I don't want to go through this process again. And they kind of shut out that idea of marriage. And obviously, alhamdulillah, we'll discuss the whole purpose of marriage. And so inshallah, that should always be driving us and reminding us. And there's, healthy boundaries that we need to keep in check, so we protect ourselves, and Allah has given us that for a reason. So if you feel like you're just being pressured, I think you need to explore that. Why that, maybe why you're running away from it, where that fear or anxiety is coming up from. And if you don't feel ready, then I think that's the part where you have to have the courage to communicate that with your loved ones, especially if it's parents who are putting that pressure. You've got to learn to speak up and share why you just need that space and time, like communicating boundaries. And again, this is a really helpful skill, because once you're sharing your life with someone, and if you don't have the courage to have those conversations with your family, there's going to be a lot of other problems that come up that are going to require you to have that courage. So you're just building that muscle earlier on. And obviously, again, with respect, inshallah, always with our parents, and having that mercy and khidmah. But it's just, we need to start speaking our truth, and don't ever let that pressure drive you to make such an important life decision. And we've seen, I'm sure you've come across it too, there's lots of instances where a person is literally now like at the doorstep of marriage, about the wedding's probably about to take place, and that whole process is driven by pressure and fear, and they're questioning it. And if so many who do end up going through it, and then there's just disasters later on. So it's really important to have the courage to speak up earlier on, and inshallah explore that. And if it's something you're running away from, again, seek that help from a professional. Go through that process, like what's going on there, and inshallah let's try to dismantle it. I've worked with individuals who, mashallah, very successful, again, check off all the boxes, and they just have a fear around marriage. And so we explored that, and getting them to a positive place so they're open to receiving that relationship in that process.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the communication aspect, because like you said, if you are struggling with that, with before marriage, then this is something that you clearly have to address, before you even take that and make that life decision. So really glad you addressed that point. You mentioned how when you work with a lot of people and a lot of clients, you kind of get them to map things out, and to discover themselves almost. Do you mind giving us an example or a few examples of what's the most common things that kind of come out of people who do map things out? What do they end up discovering? Because it's one of those things that a lot of people would find quite a strange thing to do. They never really thought of mapping things out and thinking about themselves. They always think about the other person, the person they want to marry. So what are the most things you would say that come out from the discussions you've had?
There's so many prominent ones, and again, I find there is a contrast between males and females and what comes up. I would say for females generally, the three big ones would be, definitely one is insecurity. Really feeling insecure about themselves, and so really dismantling that and connecting it to their security and self-worth coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that way they don't go into a marriage expecting the spouse to complete them, expecting the spouse to give them a love that's really never going to be attainable by another human being. And so that's a big one for women. Another one would be, their overlap, but self-worth, I think, is really important. And the third big one would be just really fear of rejection. And so constantly wanting to feel at a very, and this is where as silly as it sounds, I can't tell you the amount of, professional, mashallah, so well accomplished intellectual people I work with, but even them, we've had years of Hollywood and Bollywood movies shaping our reality. And if we'd like to think we're above that, we're not. So many people have, I'll have people say oh, well, I expect my marriage to be like a rom-com. And I'm just oh my God, subhanAllah, it shows how much work we've got.
They actually say that. They actually
say that line, and you don't understand but that's a reality. And I commend that person for speaking their truth, because there's a lot of people who think that and feel that but won't express it. And so this is where we have to be real, that many of us growing up here in the West, we've got secular values and Hollywood media shaping our reality of a relationship is, and affecting our relationship, number one, with ourselves. And that's the model I use, is first fixing the relationship within ourselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the outer circle. And many of us are always just focused on that outer circle with the spouse, and that inner work hasn't been done. So with women, the third one usually will be just the expectations around marriage. And so dismantling that and making it healthy, inshallah, making it from a place of, where it's centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where everything, inshallah, is feeding that. And so then you approach it in a much healthier way, and you don't have these unrealistic expectations that will really blow up in your face and cause a lot of pain as you go into a marriage. For males, I find the most prominent one that comes up is this idea of, my spouse should be someone who's going to be, and I don't know if it's maybe just the kind of clients I deal with, but someone who's going to really drive me, uplift me, and fulfill me in a way that really like a whole village of mentors would. So I see that a lot. The second one, there's insecurities there with males as well. This feeling of self-worth coming from their spouse, and validation that, again, should be coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think the level of comfort that we want to seek from our spouse, again, it's the expectations. You really realigning it, and just, I think, overall expectations of marriage. So dismantling a lot of those and getting clear on, where is that coming from? Is that healthy? Is that in line with the prophetic model and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires of marriage? So building that. And it's incredible, because I really think we have to approach this process in marriage with the spirit of humility. And many times it's the secular, messaging we constantly see of this like self-love, selfishness, and marriage is anything but selfish. It's about sacrifice. And so and alhamdulillah, my approach to everything has been preventative. Like the Muslim model should always be that we're taking preventative action. So I try to make sure that I'm working with couples who are, when things are good, that's when we're working on things. And that's kind of a very prophetic model. Don't wait for disaster to happen and then we react. And the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of people are just caught up in like selfishly feeding their desire for whatever they think marriage should be. Whereas I think the second difficulty happens, the D word is thrown around, and that's something I'm seeing over and over again. And throughout my work, I want to address. But we throw divorce around like it's the flavor of the day, and that's something that that we really got to address. Like when it's tough, and again, I'm not talking about the toxic marriages where, yes, divorce is a very halal, viable option. I'm talking about the regular, like we had a bad fight, and so now, we're both looking at divorce and separation. And it's like, you haven't really exhausted your options. You're approaching this from a very selfish lens. And subhanAllah, the beauty in marriage and the beauty in this relationship comes in. And, I heard this beautiful metaphor, the natural beauty of, for example, the Himalayas, right? The Mount Everest. It comes from two continents pushing each other inwards, and that beauty is created. And marriage, subhanAllah, it's that merging. And even when we're having conflicts and growing through that is where the true beauty in relationship lies. And we have to normalize and really dismantle the taboo that everyone's marriage should be perfect. And I know with your work, inshallah, and more conversations like this, it's normalizing that there's no perfect marriage. Conflicts exist, and that's okay, but that's what makes it enriching. What do you learn and what do you grow through those conflicts is what really matters. And so inshallah, having more and more couples and individuals reach out before these things happen is so vital. So I know it kind of like went in different directions, but I hope I addressed what you
no, definitely. I think you addressed loads of different, like, really important points there. But I think one key word that you mentioned is how it comes down to even expectations before marriage, because like you said, sadly, there are many conflicts that take place, which then quite easily may end up in divorce, or the couple themselves want to kind of resort to that option before they've explored anything else. Why? Because they had certain expectations of a marriage which maybe weren't the correct expectations. And again, it's having that conversation and reaching out to people beforehand and understanding. I think that leads quite well into the next part that I wanted to look into, which is the why when it comes to marriage, and the what when it comes to what are we actually looking for in a relationship. I know from like my experience, one small example, but quite a common example, would be people go into a marriage maybe expecting, like a man may go into a marriage expecting his wife to like just take care of him. Like that is the only reason why he's getting married. Like I just need someone to take care of me the way that my mum took care of me when I was younger, and that's it. But that's not very viable with what the woman is looking for. So like that's just one small example. There's many other examples why. So for some people, it's escapism. They're just trying to escape from the problems that they have in their lives, and they just want to get married thinking that that's going to solve everything. So again, like, what would your perspective be? I know, mashallah, like you've already mentioned, and I like how you take everything back to that kind of fulfillment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the prophetic example, as opposed to, like you mentioned, the Bollywood, Hollywood kind of narrative. So yeah, I mean, what would your thoughts be on let's maybe start with why we get married and what we're looking for in a relationship.
And that's the question of the day, and something that you constantly have to come back to in marriage. But I do want to just say, Shabbir, the question or the comment you just made that some men may be getting married because they want their spouse to take care of them. That's actually at a very unconscious level. Like the fact if someone actually recognizes that's like a good thing, because now we can address it. Unfortunately, many people at a very subconscious level don't realize that that's what they're expecting. Like that's where, going in and doing the deep work, it's like, why am I getting married? And many times we kind of give like the answer that we think we should be giving, but we don't really speak the truth and what we, and so, coming to this question of why do we get married? I think the most obvious is that, this is inshallah someone who's going to bring me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is someone who is going to fulfill my mission and purpose in this dunya of seeking Allah's pleasure, and someone I want to enter Jannah with. As part of a course that we did with Sheikh Muhammad on Discover You, the marriage that led to Jannah, right? And it's this idea, like, that's what our marriage should be around. And so, like I said, these are the beautiful answers that we should have and that should center us. The reality is our actions don't manifest that. Our relationship with our spouse don't manifest that. And that's where we've got to sit down. And this is why I'm such a proponent, I do a lot of Islamic work and talks, because that's very much aligned with this. If you don't have Islamic practices, if you don't have a regular a regular feeding of your soul that's happening with knowledge and with practices that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires of us outside of just the fard, that's going to show up in your marriage. That's going to show up in your marriage, and you're not going to live with that manifestation. So again, if someone's listening to this, maybe you're newlywed, maybe you've been married a couple of years, maybe you've been married 10, ask yourself, does my marriage achieve this objective of seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure? And this is in the small moments. This is in the small moments that it shows up. If I'm sitting on the sofa and my spouse asks for water, do I see that as an act of worship and an act of seeking Allah's pleasure? I want to get up and get that cup of water for my spouse, or am I just dismissive? It's in these small moments that we can truly hold ourselves up and ask, is this being manifested? Because when you get married, you're marrying basically a mirror that's going to show you the ugliest version of yourself or the most beautiful version of yourself. And so we all know the answers that we should have for why marrying someone. I think the true question is, will we act accordingly in that way in the small moments to moments in our marriage and in our relationship? Because too often we think, because we share this close relationship, that person can be our punching bag. We're not really this person doesn't really count in that, or we dismiss it. So, again, something I've wanted to address, inshallah, is just the level of anger that I see and vulgarity that spouses will use in conflict, and somehow thinking that this is okay. When did this become part of your vocabulary and norm, that you can just throw around the F word because you're pissed at your spouse, but you're praying 5 times a day and you're doing all these other things? Not to say that anyone's perfect, but let's sit down and assess, right? What is acceptable and not, and is this aligned with my purpose? So, simple, beautiful exercise I love to do with couples. And again, it doesn't matter what phase and season of your marriage you're at. Find a Quranic verse or a hadith that is going to be your marriage motto, your slogan. This is what's going to, inshallah, drive us. And we're always going to come back and be does this, are we fulfilling this ayah? And you're really making your mission ayah. So in a lot of my coaching work, it's always tied to having a verse in that month, and inshallah, everything you're doing, you're going to connect it back and you're going to ask yourself. So I think it's practices like this, but that really comes in when you have a regular relationship and practice with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I'm always a proponent of, if you're always growing together in your relationship with Allah, I can guarantee you will have success and contentment in your marriage. And so I know the podcast name is Happily Ever After. I would say what you want is, contentment ever after, inshallah, the rida that we're all seeking. But a key ingredient I can tell you is just make sure that you're both always growing. My love for my spouse has always been strongest when we're taking a class together, when we're there's that knowledge that's always propelling us forward, because then you're tied to something deeper. And that's what you need to establish is, is it on a superficial level? And again, this sad reality we see, couples can sit there, go out for dinner, and have nothing to talk about. That on the most basic level, our marriage should be a friendship. We should have a friendship bond there, because that's what, inshallah, is going to allow us to thrive and really show up in our relationship, and also, number one, in pushing us forward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's on the most basic level. And there's a whole workshop and segment just on cultivating that friendship and cultivating deeper connections, so we go beyond that superficial. And so many people just stay at that superficial for years, and that's where the damage is very easy to happen, because if no roots have gone deep, it's very easy for things small as just throw you guys off.
Yeah, 2 things that I love what you mentioned just now is the first thing was quite amazing, quite powerful, is how you gave the example of just getting a glass of water for your spouse, and either you see that as a chore and something that's really, again, do I have to do this? Or do see this as, well, actually, this is me earning some reward and love from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In kind of like in turn, I also earn the love of my spouse as well, like by maintaining it. So I think that's such a powerful example, because it's like the smallest thing ever that we would never pay any attention to. It's not like, buying a bunch of flowers or taking your spouse on a holiday,
Yeah.
just a glass of water. But I think, yeah, you're right. I think that is very telling of your mindset, in fact, when
And
it
that's
comes
the
to.
trick of shaitan, right? And that's in our, and like even right now, if you're single, it doesn't matter. That's the trick of shaitan, that we focus on only the big things. Oh, so if I organize some big event, if I am not doing a talk, or if I'm not doing this, then like, my small prayer doesn't count. And so him to make us feel that our active ibadah in the small moments are belittle the impact of those, that's the true crime. And so even in marriage, we tend to think that these big, grand gestures, and subhanAllah, the secular research backs this up, that married couples who do these small acts of kindness and goodwill have higher satisfaction rates than the guy who does go and buy like that one expensive jewelry piece or one vacation. Those are the couples that actually have a more strained relationship. So it's in the small moments. Yeah.
That's amazing. And the second thing is what you mentioned about the Quranic ayah, linking it back to a Quranic verse. That's actually quite unique in the sense that, again, not many people think of linking the marriage back to, like, instead of having a motto, which is, again, taken from like the internet or something, or some quote that they've misconstrued and misunderstood, is taking it from an ayah in the Quran. I think that's an amazing exercise that I myself can actually learn from, and maybe lots of people listening can inshallah implement. Is there any examples of that, like how couples have taken a verse from the Quran that stood out for you in the past?
Yeah. And I just want to add that, the reason this exercise is so important, because we don't realize how we've let secular and Hollywood and mainstream media define our relationship. And so even if we don't want to admit it and come to terms with it, there are slogans and there are rituals that they've given that we've let define our relationship. And so what you're doing with this exercise is redefining and really being conscious and mindful, inshallah, of what we're going to choose to define our relationship and what we choose to live by. As a very simple example, and when it's the hadith of a smile is a sadaqah, right? And so now imagine it in the lens of marriage. If a smile is sadaqah to a stranger, imagine the magnitude and the weight of it towards your spouse. And so I have like an ebook out that talks about conflicts and the whole principle. One of the like secular experts in marriage, Dr. Gottman, talks about this idea of deposits. Actually, Stephen Covey had talked about it as well. And so it's not realizing, subhanAllah, the deposits we can make with our spouse, and like it's a larger, really beautiful practice and understanding. And again, aligned with Islamic values. But taking moments in your day to stop and smile at your spouse. Shabbir, you're married, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you just, and it's not to put you on the spot, but just like a reflection, how many times in a day do we just pause and like look over at our spouse? And if we're both working from home during COVID now, just walk over and like give them that genuine smile, or if they ask you to do something, just pausing and like, yeah, sure, of course I'll get that for you. We really belittle this simple act. So this couple, this hadith, and we're like, okay, that's the magnitude it's having on a stranger, and it's a charity, then imagine how much more important it is that I practice this regularly, daily with my spouse. And so that was like something they used for like a week or a month, and just kept making sure that they were practicing that no matter how tough things were getting, they would practice this, really lowering the wing of mercy and making sure that they were smiling at each other even when things were maybe annoying or a little difficult.
Yeah, no, it's very practical as well, and it's one of those things that is so simple, but just looking at it from the lens of marriage, you don't have to find a verse or a hadith about marriage in the Quran. You can just find general things, right, that you can apply and implement. So I think that is actually
the
an
whole
amazing.
Quran is like, it's a marriage guidebook, right? And it just depends on what season of your life and what you're looking for, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send it to you. Just the idea of sacrifice, right? An ongoing theme in the Quran and through the Prophet stories, and just finishing, just finishing Eid and, the sacrifice Ibrahim Islam made. Why do we not think that marriage doesn't require sacrifice? Why do we think that it should just be so easy? Like it's when I bring this up to couples who are really struggling, it's almost like this is such a profound lesson. And it's like, Subhan, that's a mindset we have to go to. Like, yeah, it's tough. It requires sacrifice. But in an age where we feel like things should just be given to us, and if things are tough, well, that person can't handle me. I use this quote because it's so funny. I'm sure you've seen it on like Instagram, always someone sharing it. It's like this, I think it's Coco Chanel quote. It's like, if you can't handle me at my best, or no, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me. I'm like, no one should be handling at your worst. And it becomes, and we adapt these like secular sayings and be like, and it's just such a norm. Like when you see grown men and women discussing this, I'm like, no, like Allah has set guidelines. No one should be handling you when you have that kind of anger. Like that's unacceptable behavior. Unless you're a child, like that doesn't fly. So it's small things like this that we just have to. And number one is self-awareness. Check yourself, and again, take yourself to account before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes you to account.
Absolutely. You know, one word that you mentioned before was the word friendship. Like a marriage should be like a friendship. Again, you know, yeah, exactly. And like coming back to the question of what do we look for in a marriage, would you say that like a friendship or companionship is on the list there, like one of the things that you should seek in a marriage, like where your spouse becomes almost like your friend? Like, what would your thoughts be on that?
So I want to understand your question better first, so before I answer. Do you mean before you get married, should there be this, should you feel like there's a friendship there? Or do you mean, should there be certain qualities that I can see a friendship forming?
Yeah, I'm more talking about before getting married. Like what you seek in the marriage is a friendship as well as being married to someone.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the reason I'm asking for that clarification, because a lot of people think that, oh, well, we should be friends. You know, when we're getting to know each other or before that process, like if I can't see him as my friend, and you know, I'm like the traditional right there. There's no friendship between male and female, so don't go down that road if that's your mindset. However, there are qualities that we can look for in a person, right? That can determine, inshallah, can there be a friendship being formed? Do I feel there's a chemistry in terms of like, you know, the way we communicate, the topics we're interested in, the sense of adventure and curiosity and growth that really nurture what friendship is about? You know, is that empathy and compassion there? So I don't need to be your best friend when I'm getting to know you, because again, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts bounds there, and I don't think we should cross those. Those are for our protection. However, there's qualities that I can assess and I can ask about, and I can see when we're communicating if they exist, and be like, yes, I think a friendship can form, inshallah. And you know, I think it's really important to bring this question up because we see it again in secular society, that, and what most women will put is like, oh, I married my best friend. Well, guess my husband wasn't my best friend until like 6 years after we got married. You know, it takes time to build that relationship with someone. And because, you know, we didn't know each other before we got married, like we got to know each other in that process. And then that friendship got to build and took time. He wasn't my first person that I would say everything to in our first year, or I could just open up to. You know, it takes time to cultivate that. And I say the same thing about love. And you know, I'm always like calling people out who are in that premarital phase, and they'll be like, oh, you know, I'm just like, I love her. I'm like, no, you are infatuated by her. Love comes after like a year or two, when you can wake up with all their ugly and annoying habits, and you're so worried about them. That's love. Right. So it's the you know, societal message in mainstream media that like, oh my God, I love her. I'm like, you know her.
No, it's important. And by the way, we're on the same page. I should further clarify what I asked was, before marriage, like what you're seeking in the marriage itself is friendship, not like during the process. So I think you've answered it anyway, that it's definitely important to have a level of friendship, but not to, I guess what you've said is not to expect it straight away, like that person is going to be like the closest person to you that you can automatically share everything with. I guess these things do take time. But I think,
you know, have this mentality of like, I love gardening. I love plants. You know, it's very healing. It's the Prophet was very attached to nature as well. View your marriage as that. Like it requires that, you know, tender care, that watering, that constant, like, am I giving them enough light? We need to nurture our relationship in the same way. And I think many times what happens is we're really excited in that initial phase. And once marriage happens, we really start neglecting these small things that are integral. And so friendship is just like that. It requires cultivation, inshallah, once you get married, that you have to keep at the forefront and keep asking yourself, am I investing in this relationship, and how? There's something else that you mentioned I wanted to address, but now like it just went by. Go ahead, sorry.
That's fine, no worries. I want to actually bring your attention to something that you posted on Instagram actually not too long ago, which when I read the caption, I was really fascinated by what you mentioned, is how you said that marriage is not about a husband and wife in particular, but you kind of said like the focus should be taken off like yourself and your spouse, and you should take it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost before anything else. And you mentioned many other points there, but maybe if you could just go into like what was the thought behind what you posted, because I thought again it was an amazing piece of advice where again marriage is always seems to be very self-centered and centered around the spouse, which I mean of course, you know, end of the day you are marrying someone and it is important, you do need to give them attention, but you know, what was your thought behind that? And clearly it must have been from your observations, I guess, as well, like from your experience, that people don't really put Allah first. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
And subhanAllah, this sparked what I was going to say, because it's tied to that friendship. This question encompasses both. So I believe that, you know, friendship should exist at the most basic level in a marriage. However, we shouldn't expect our spouse to have the level, and you know, a lot of mainstream secular therapists talk about this now, this idea that we expect our marriage to give us what traditionally a village gave us. And so, yes, you're going to be my best friend, but I can't expect you to give me what like 50 people should give me, what my parents, the support and mentorship and nurturing, and you should be uplifting me, and you should be fixing my problems, and you should be my go-to, and you should just make me happy, and you should plan trips, and, you know, all of these things that we traditionally got from a community. And now that we live very isolated lives, and Muslims sadly are, you know, affected by this as well, we are not part of a mosque community in the traditional sense of what community gave us. I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but in Canada, unfortunately, like, you know, very isolated. You don't feel like you're part of a larger community. And so we put all that weight on our spouse. And so to answer your question of, you know, taking the focus off the spouse, it's this, because we put such an unhealthy weight and expectation on what our spouse should give us in this marriage, that a lot of the expectations, and so this is what's really deep in this point I want people to understand, is so one of the poisons in marriage that will destroy, like, you know, somehow when you think of like the hadith of the Prophet said, I mean, gossiping literally like burns your good deed. So contempt in marriage is the poison that can kill your marriage. It is the #1 indicator of divorce. And what's deeper than contempt that feeds it is expectation. And so when you have so much expectation, emotional, intellectual, spiritual expectation, all just coming from this one person and placing it on, you are going to breed contempt. Contempt leads to anger. Like, sometimes it's a very toxic pattern that many people just see the anger part, like, oh, you know, I'm just angry at him for this. Well, it's really, you know, much deeper, and there's other factors in it. So the reason that post, it was inspired by, is my own lived experience with my husband and our relationship, and obviously the work that I've been doing, being a student of knowledge, and then the secular, you know, knowledge that I've also acquired in this field, is this, that we need to have a healthy expectation, but understanding that we will never get the love that we desire from a person. There's a reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we have these, we only know of the 99 attributes, right? But there's so many more that, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who we can look to for that love, for that fulfillment. And again, you will only find that sakina that you're seeking, not through your spouse, but through your relationship and through the practices that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. And that's when you're going to be so healthy. So stop putting that expectation that my spouse should be doing this, and this is why I'm upset. My spouse should be, you know, XYZ, or he doesn't, or she doesn't. It's really not about that. Once you can come to a place of fulfillment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make that the focus in your marriage, watch how, you know, it changes the rhythm and dynamic of your relationship in the most incredible way.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I'm so big on this as well. Like I'm a big believer, huge believer in this, and I've even had conversations like with my own wife in the past about similar points, like how, because at the end of the day, like if you pin all your hopes and expectations in one individual, you are most certainly going to be let down.
Yeah.
Like that person is going to let you down at some point, no matter how much you love them, and like it's a dangerous move to make. to put all your love, all your hope, all your happiness in one person. And that doesn't have to be a spouse. It could be your child, it could be your friend, it could be anyone, right?
Yeah.
Some people, they think that, like, there's, like, again, this Hollywood kind of thing, like, I would die without you kind
Yeah.
of thing. Like, I just can't live without you. Sorry, that's the saying, right? And that is really dangerous. Like, even mentally, let alone spiritually, it is dangerous, because the moment that they do let you down, or the moment that they do, make a mistake, or they hurt you, they upset you, your whole world comes crashing down, and it's like you can't live now. So I'm a huge believer in this, that when it comes to marriage, especially,
love that is taught to us, and even grown adults not realizing it.
yeah, exactly. So, like, when it comes to marriage, especially, I think this is a really important point. Like, yes, your spouse is there, but remember, because Allah literally says in the Quran, He is the one who placed love and mercy between you. Like, the source of that love and mercy comes from Allah, and it's not like your own love. It's not yours. So I think these points are really important. So I appreciate you flagging that up and bringing that up. With as we're coming to near to the end, I wanted to end with, because mashallah, we've discussed quite a few things, starting from, firstly, how to know you're ready to get married, leading on to what you look for in a relationship, and then kind of going into, like, this kind of stuff about the relationship itself. So I guess the final thing I wanted to touch on real quick was, how would you define what a meaningful relationship is? I mean, anyone can be in a relationship.
Yeah.
Anyone can get married and get the nikah done and say, I accept and I do, and it's done. But how would you define what a true meaningful relationship? One thing I really appreciated you saying was how, like, when you grow together, and when you're, like, increasing in knowledge and you're taking classes and stuff like that, really gives you a boost. So would you say that's a factor in a meaningful relationship? And generally, what other things come to your mind?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and one that, again, I hope couples explore often. And there's so many layers to it. There's so many things that, alhamdulillah, can enrich and make our relationship meaningful. And there's not like one thing, but I think at the core of it, again, it has to come back to, and it has to be centered in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What makes your relationship meaningful is that, and Ibn Atta talks about this, like, what he defines what friendship is, and he says, a good friendship is that you feel your soul has elevated and is closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you depart. And so your spouse, inshallah, should be the same way, where every time you're together, inshallah, you feel this remembrance and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if your relationship is just based on Netflix and phones, and again, shopping and all those superficial things that don't fill you and don't make you feel good as much as you might think in the moment, but just really numb you and are addictions that many people are consumed in, that's what defines your marriage. You're going to feel a very empty void that is going to build over time and will create a mismatch. And when those conflicts happen, they are going to hit hard. But when, inshallah, there's that deeper meaning in your relationship, that growth is always happening towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are setting the course for your marriage in a very beautiful way. And then again, that path to growth into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will branch out, and beautiful meaning will manifest in so many different ways. Volunteering, being more in nature, like all the things that are forms of ibadah, taking care of our body, our mental health, our family values. The in-laws is such a big point of conflict in relationships. And again, if it's rooted in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it's rooted in our meaning and our purpose comes from seeking Allah's pleasure, and so we understand the value of family, you can deal with that difficulty together as a team. And this is so important, right? So it allows you to feel, and that's like a whole topic itself, but always feeling like you're a team, inshallah, in the way you're facing the world. And that's only achieved when you both are aligned on what is it that our end goal is, what is it that we're always working towards, and always come back and reassessing that. So I think, the simple answer is that it's got that, a meaningful marriage starts and ends with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is, again, like I think, what I've said earlier on, it's in those small moments. It's in developing the practices that are healthy, having your own, growth path, and then the one together as well. And if you don't feel like when you depart from your spouse that you're closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's not on your spouse necessarily. We have to take responsibility for us. What am I doing to not create that energy and not create that remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And then, sit there, inshallah, and discuss that.
Yeah, I like your simple answer, which is to start and end with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think that's an amazing takeaway point. for anyone, I guess. I mean, it's obviously easier said than done, but it's definitely something that you can continuously, like you said, continuously go back to reassess and to reflect on, and inshallah like you gave the plant example. I think it's amazing. Just continue growing, and you'll bear the fruits later on, and it's not an overnight process. So yeah, really important points. Sister Razia, Jazakallah khair. Honestly, thank you so much for joining us once again. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and all of the amazing practical points that we can really take away, inshallah, hopefully, from this one. And for everyone else listening, do check out Sister Razia's work. You can head over to raziahamidi.com to check out the article and to even get in touch with her, inshallah. The ebook is available, I know, as well, on the site. So definitely do check that out. And thank you so much once again, Sister Razia. Barakallah feek. And to everyone else, inshallah, do stay tuned for more podcasts coming your way, from myself, Shabbir, from Sister Razia. That's all we have time for today, but inshallah we will see you next time. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.